So I want to do the impossible,
They're gone.
which is to tell you that if you have a laptop, iPad, iPhone, whatever, either put it away, or if you're taking notes on it, that's fine. But you know, the biggest distraction we have is that technology in front of us. We're afraid to pay attention to other things. I am going to actually have you do something on your e-devices here in a few minutes, but between now and then, if you want to sort of close up or decide whatever that would be great. You know, this is something that you will need to deal with your own students. And anytime that there is, I know in my own classroom, anytime that there are laptops or iPads or anything else in the classroom, it has to be really well defined when we're using them and when we're not using them. That goes with just about anything, whether it's science equipment that's sitting on the tables, or the technology that's sitting there, or even if you're teaching a math class and you've got a pile of cubes sitting in the middle of the table. If they're there and they're within hand's reach of your students, they just can't resist, right? Just like we can't resist checking that Facebook account. So we kind of have to help our students to be able to do the same thing that we discipline ourselves to do. So I appreciate you helping with that. So what we're going to talk about today is spend a little bit of time with the whole idea of research methods, because last couple of times we've been talking about literature reviews and how you kind of read a study or put a study together, what the kind of the paper looks like and so forth. But in the process of doing that, we've got to figure out kind of how are we going to collect the data, what kind of data do we want, and what are some pluses and minuses, maybe advantages and disadvantages to some of the different research methods. We're going to take a look at, this is what we will use our computers and things for in a few minutes, looking at some research methodologies that are used in studies that we can run across. We're going to talk about what this has to do with the final paper that you write for our class here, a little bit of summary, and then look at our last session together. So, I love this cartoon. Yes, it's remotely possible that Earth's gravity has increased, but I think there's a much simpler explanation. So the question is, how do we most effectively collect and analyze data to draw accurate conclusions? So let's suppose, for example, that I was going to do a study on the effectiveness of biology teachers in Northwest Ohio and what kind of an impact they're having on their students. All right, there's my study. And here's how I'm going to conduct it. I am going to give a survey to 100 biology teachers in Northwest Ohio. And on the survey, I'm going to ask them to rate the quality of their teaching on a scale of 1 to 10. I will ask them to rate the impact that they're having on their students on a scale of 1 to 10, the quality of their biology class on a scale of 1 to 10, and their ability to organize, plan, and run a sort of a discipline shift in their classroom on a scale of 1 to 10. And the teachers will give themselves ratings. They'll fold up the surveys, they'll send them in, or they'll do them at SurveyMonkey. I will look at the data, and I will draw some conclusions about how effective biology teachers are in Northwest Ohio. What do you think about my study?
It's biased.
Megan?
Yeah. Well, yeah, like the teachers will probably like say they're better than what they really are, so you need to get like the students' opinions and like others' opinions of those teachers. Because otherwise this is going to be the teachers' opinions of themselves.
Oh, so you think that they might not tell the truth?
Probably
Is that what
not.
Okay, so, well, there's two possibilities, right? One is that they don't tell the truth. What's the other one?
They tell too hard of the truth. Like they're too hard on themselves.
They're too hard on them. There's three answers here. So they're too much truth, too hard on themselves, or what else?
They tell the truth.
They don't answer?
They don't answer. Okay, there's four of them.
Some cases.
How about this one? Sorry, I mean, just made this one up. Maybe the fourth one is they don't know. You really don't know. In other words, if somebody were to say to you, how effective are you in your class? You say, I'm really effective in that class. Maybe you're not, and you didn't know it. You know? And you're not lying, you just don't realize that you're ineffective. Or conversely, some teachers that beat up on themselves and keep saying, I know I can do that better, and you ask them, how effective are you? They give themselves a really low score, because they honestly don't think they're being very effective, but in reality, they're having a huge effect on people. They just didn't know it. Right? So they're not lying, it's just, that's their perspective, right? So Meg, you said that as an alternative, instead of just asking the teachers, I waited till you had a bite of something first.
Yeah, I know. We're good now.
Yeah, okay. So I'm killing time until you swell. So what would you do instead?
Well, I'd get them to rate themselves and then get either their colleagues or the students to rate how much they're learning in the classroom. So that you can like compare the two to see, oh, well, like is it about the same, or is like the teacher like crazy high and the students are like really low numbers or something?
Okay, do you guys agree with that? What else might you do? Okay.
Could you define like what effective is, and so that they know, like, because effective can mean many things, so they know what exactly effective is in this study, and then they can better determine if they are effective.
Yeah, great point. So what is the construct we're actually trying to measure? Give me a hand if, well, you don't have to applaud, just raise your hand. If, but applause is always fun. Raise your hand if you have been in a class where your teacher was not terribly effective at teaching you the subject, but was really effective on shaping you as a person. Have you had that experience? Yeah, a lot of you have. You know, that's kind of an interesting thing, isn't it? And have you had the opposite happen? Somebody who's pretty good as a teacher. I mean, you learned a lot of math, or you learned a lot of social studies in that class, but the teacher was, you know, sort of almost in spite of the teacher, right? So I think Megan's right. We have to think a little bit about what it means to be effective. Are we talking about how much biology they learned? Or are we talking about how well they were shaped and molded as a person to be a better, maybe better study skills and you know, all those kinds of things. So we have to know what we're measuring, and so we might want to say, okay, let's suppose that we're leaving the kind of shaping of the human beings out of it. Let's just assume that we're trying to figure out whether kids are actually learning biology well in Mrs. So-and-so's class, right? So how might you test that? Rachel?
I know like I think it's the O-test, they're doing like pre and post tests.
Yeah.
So that's a good way to see like how well they do at the beginning compared to how they do at the end.
Mm-hmm. Good. Have you guys all heard of SLOs? You heard that term? You should have heard of it because it was in the Newton Action newsletter this month, but just in case you didn't read that article. But an SLO is a student learning outcome, or the student learning objective, and what happens is they're asking teachers, for the most part, if you teach in a middle school setting, and you're within that range of grades 3-8, or really for us 4-8, your students are taking the OAAs, and we can get information about sort of pre-test and post-test data, and we can see from one year to the next how well they have grown in their understanding of math or science or whatever. But in high school, we don't really have that kind of a measure. So the high school teachers in particular are being asked to write these SLOs, which is a statement of these are the outcomes that I want my students to have mastered by the end of the year. And you create a pre-test for your class that you give in the fall, and you collect data on what your students know and don't know, and you teach them all year, and at the end of the year you give them a similar test, kind of a Form B, and you give them that post-test, and we can show the game. Right? Here's what they didn't know, and here's what they do at the end of the year. Good idea? Well, I don't know, maybe. I do know this. I had dinner with 5, 6 of my former secondary math method students at OCTM, and I was asking them about what's going on in their schools, and they're scattered all over the state. And they were telling me about what they're doing with SLOs, and one of the people at my table, Kathy, said, you know, we're not stupid. What you do at the beginning of the year is you make the test so impossibly hard that the students can't begin to get 1 or 2 questions right. You know, and that way at the end of the year you can show growth. Because if you make it too easy, then you won't be able to show the growth, and it looks like you're not accomplishing anything in your class. And after all, if I am a teacher and I'm responsible for making up that pre-test and post-test, if I design it just right, I can make sure that my students look really good by the end of the year. You know, so we had this conversation about how, in some ways, it's kind of silly. On the other hand, you know, fact is, if my students don't know this, but they're supposed to know this by the end of the year, if I can define what this and this are, then I could create some kind of a test to be able to measure and see whether they've actually had a, you know, a significant change during the year. So, bottom line, if I wanted to show that that biology teacher is effective in teaching his or her students biology throughout the year, and if the students are learning a lot of content, if I just ask the teacher for his or her opinion, and they do a survey that way, you're going to get a very biased look of what's going on in my classroom. I rate myself, I rate my own professionalism, my own teaching, but I'm not really going to know until I look at the students themselves. And by the way, if I look at the students themselves, I can give them a pre-test and a post-test. That's a nice way to measure the growth. What else might I do? Give me some other alternatives. Alexa?
Interview the students and ask them how they feel about their teacher, what she does well, what he or she doesn't do well. Kind of get a more in-depth qualitative.
Yeah, very good. Tell me about a typical day in your biology class. What I remember one time in a former life, 100 years ago, when I was principal of a high school, I had to do evaluation of teachers. And I went to observe a social studies teacher one day. It was her, one of 2 annual evaluations for her. And her class just blew me away. It was so good. The students were actively engaged. They were doing World War II. And she had artifacts from World War II. She had a little video clip that she showed them. She had working in small groups. It was a really, really good class. And I was impressed with what I saw. I went back to my office and I started writing up a little bit of the report because we were then going to have a kind of a post-observation conference. And I went home that night. I come into the office the next day, and there is a note in my mailbox. And the note was written anonymously by a number of students from her class. Now, anonymous notes you got to be careful with anyway, right? Because you don't know who's putting this in your box. But the fact of the matter is, the students told me in that note, "We appreciate that you came to watch our social studies class yesterday, Mr. Brahier, but I will tell you that what you saw is not a typical day in this class. She is the most awful teacher we've ever had. Every day is a lecture. Every day is boring. We sleep through that class, and I can't believe how much of a dog and pony show she put on the day you came in. You really ought to come back into class unannounced sometime when she's not expecting you." Wow, that's a pretty powerful note to get from a high school senior. And I thought, wow, man, what kind of a bias did I get here? So I did a little bit of investigating, and I did a little bit of dropping in. And I don't think that what I found was that it was quite as bad as the students were painting it, but it was definitely not what she was painting the day that I was in there, okay? Because an observation tells you something, but several observations tell you a lot more. And sitting down with the student and saying, so what's it really like in Brahier's class? Really? You're going to learn a lot more than you're going to learn from asking the teacher, what is your class like, right? You get the true scoop. So when all was said and done, we had a little bit of a compromise here. I was able to give her a somewhat positive evaluation to let her know, hey, the day I was there, things look pretty good, but it looks like days that I'm not there, maybe things aren't so good. So let's talk about that. We had to work through all of that. It wasn't pretty, but it happened. So, getting different angles on it. When we're trying to do a certain kind of study, some type of research methods are more appropriate than others, depending on the kind of study you want to do. And there are lots of different options available to you in terms of the ways that you can gather data for studies. So what we're going to do is, I'm going to have you do a little exercise in pairs right now. And I have on each strip of paper, I have a research method. So that's what chapter 6 we read about for today was all about, was research methods. And I'm going to ask for, we're going to do it this way. I'll give each pair a method. I'd like for you to examine it, and I'd like for you to make a list of together 2 or 3 advantages of using that particular data source if you were doing a study. And then what would be 2 or 3 drawbacks? Because every way that you have of getting information about what's going on in your classroom, every method that we could come up with has got some really good things about it, but a couple of potential drawbacks too. And so I want you to brainstorm with your partner to come up, write down 2 or 3 advantages, 2 or 3 disadvantages, and then once we've done it, I'm going to give you just about 5 minutes to do that, and then I'm going to go around the room and have you report back on what you came up with as strengths and weaknesses of each method. Okay? So I might have to move you around a bit. I think we've got an even number in here, so if you two want to work together. Two work together. You two, can you work with Zoe?
Yep. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I have my